Evening, everyone. Welcome to the March 13th, 2023 edition of the Town of Garner Planning Commission. Glad to see some faces out in the audience. Hope everyone is well. We are going to start a new tradition as per our upcoming rules of procedure. We're going to have a adoption of the agenda, but before we do that, I'd like to motion that we move our Gatsby Station CZMP 2208 ahead of our zoning text amendment and rules of procedure to item number C. Is there any, or I guess all in favor of that move? Or I guess we can get a second first. Is there a second for that motion?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
With that, do we need to adopt the agenda at that point now since we've, yeah, all right. I'll go ahead and motion that we adopt the agenda as modified.
I'll make that motion.
All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, I think that's unanimous.
It's unanimous, and I will call the roll.
Perfect, thank you.
Gina Avent,
Here.
John Blaska,
Here?
Ralph Carson.
Here.
Philip Jefferson could not be with us tonight, so I will call Vong Moi,
Here.
Sherry Phillips,
Here.
and Michael Valent.
Here.
And that's 6 members present.
All right, thank you. And if we need to reverse that for next time, roll call first. I don't know what's most appropriate.
Yeah, maybe roll call first.
All right,
next
sorry.
time. No,
We'll
all
go,
good.
we can update the agenda for next month to add that adoption in there.
Okay.
Cool, thank you. I think Mr. Voiland has offered to do a moment of reflection.
I did. It's not a prayer. No need to bow your heads. Winston Churchill, who led the English in defending their homeland in World War II, as well as their involvement in the D-Day offensive, once said, "Plans are of little importance, but planning is essential." The details of a written plan, which may be fashioned years ahead of some target date, can often turn out to be incorrect. But it's the planning process that is key, because if done right, it will demand a thorough exploration and options and contingencies. Knowledge gained during that explorative process is crucial to the selection of appropriate actions in the future. So as we meet as a planning commission, let's look at, discuss, and critically explore what is being proposed, what options have been considered, and how any proposed use of land in the town might best fit with its character and the needs and wants of its residents.
Thank you very much. Very appreciative. Moving on to our next item, the minutes from our February 13th meeting. Is there a motion?
Make a motion to accept the February 13th.
Second.
All right, we have a motion to adopt the minutes as stated. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Nope. All right, sounds good. All right, moving on to our old and new business. Just a reminder for those in attendance, this is not a scheduled public hearing. However, we will take comment from the public as appropriate. We will have a staff overview of the request, followed by a presentation by the applicant. We'll then take comments from those opposed to the project, followed by comments to those who are in favor of the project. We'll have Q&A from the commission as appropriate, followed by comments and vote by the commission. And we will try to limit all comments to 10 minutes each by each group, that being the applicant, proponents, and opponents. And we will hope that you all elect a spokesperson to help keep our comments brief and non-repetitive. Moving forward, we have conditional zoning map amendment request CZPD 2202 Copper Ridge. The applicant has requested to have that item removed from the Planning Commission agenda, so I will motion that we table that case until a further time. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion to table the Copper Ridge project, along with a second.
Okay, so the motion on the floor is to table Copper Ridge until an unknown future date, and I will call the vote. Gina Avent,
Aye.
John Blaska,
Aye.
Ralph Carson,
Aye.
Vong Moi,
Aye.
Sherry Phillips,
Aye.
Michael Voiland,
Aye.
and that's unanimous.
All right, thank you. Next, we have CZ MP 2206 Ackerman Road. Again, the applicant has requested that that meeting be tabled to a specific date, but I will make our motion that we table it to a more appropriate time.
I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second to table the Ackerman Road project.
Okay, the motion on the table. Do you have a date that you would like to continue it to? The
I will-
April regular meeting, I think is what
I will
they-
leave it up to them. If they want to do the April meeting or March, whenever, during a regular meeting,
Okay, so the
no
April.
special meeting.
I'm just, the reason that we're doing this is to keep people kind of informed of the expected schedule. So if we don't specify it during the meeting, then I feel like whether we would legally have to or not, we would need to really re-notice everybody
Okay.
so that they're aware, so.
All right, well, I will amend my motion that we table it until the April 10th regular meeting.
Does the second agree to that amendment?
Yes.
Okay. And I will call the vote. Gina Avent,
Aye.
John Blaska,
Aye.
Ralph Carson,
Aye.
Vong Moi,
Aye.
Sherry Phillips, and Michael Boyland.
Aye.
And that's unanimous.
All right, thank you. Moving on to our next case, CZ MP 2208 Gatsby Station. I am, I guess, motioning to excuse myself from this case due to a conflict of interest. Is it a motion or just a approval? Yes.
I believe it's a motion, but prior to your excusal, you might want to nominate the.
Do I need to nominate the pro tem first?
Yeah.
All right. Prior to my excusal from this case, I'd like to nominate Ms. Avent to be the chair pro tem while I am absent from this case. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion to nominate Ms. Avent as chair pro tem for the Gatsby Station project.
And I will call the vote. Gina Avent,
Aye.
John Blaska,
Aye.
Ralph Carson,
Aye.
Vong Moi,
Aye.
Sherry Phillips,
Aye.
and Michael Boyland.
Aye.
That's unanimous.
All right, now I will motion that I excuse myself from CZMP 2208 due to a conflict of interest. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second.
Okay, and I will call the vote. Gina Avent,
Aye.
John Blaska,
Aye.
Ralph Carson,
Aye.
Vong Moi,
Aye.
Sherry Phillips,
Aye.
and Michael Boyland.
Aye.
That's unanimous.
I'll see you after the case. Good luck. Really, just staff overview, yes. Basically, staff overview, applicant will speak after that. Feel free to jump in with commission questions whenever you want. Then opponents get to speak, and proponents get to speak. And then vote, discussion by the commission.
This meeting is not a scheduled public hearing. However, the meeting is open to the public so they can obtain information about items on the commission's agenda. The meeting will be conducted in the following order. At this time, we will have staff overview of the Gatsby Station, KCZ MP 2208.
Thank you and good evening, Commissioners. As Ms. Avent said, this is Gatsby Station, a Tier 2 conditional rezoning request, CZMP 2208. Tier 2 requests are those with the master plan and a set of proposed zoning conditions. The applicant is Brendy Vega of Withers and Ravenel. The owners are various members of the Bailey family, the Robert family, and Mr. Donald Lee Burgess. The request is to rezone approximately 60.925 acres from Wake County Residential, R30, to multifamily conditional, which would be adopted as MFA C264 under the new UDO townwide rezoning, for the development of a residential community not to exceed 2.8 dwelling units an acre. There are zoning conditions that restrict the range of uses to only townhomes and residential cluster, and architectural and other conditions are proposed. So this is a aerial view of the site location. As you can see, the site here is highlighted in orange. Just to the north, we have the edge of Auburn, which was a PRD that came through previously through the town. It's approximately somewhere around 800 residential units, both townhouse and single family. You can see the future 540 alignment just to the plan left of Rock Quarry Road, as well as multiple county subdivisions just to the south of the site. So we have the Stony Creek County subdivision and the Hiley subdivision. Across from the site, we have some existing single-family residential as well as some vacant parcels. This is a street view from Rock Quarry Road. And as I said, the adjacent land use and zoning, we have the edge of Auburn, which was adopted as an R4 district under the townwide rezoning. We have the Wake County R30 to the south. And then along 70 to the south, there is the Commercial Highway Overlay District, some light industrial, and you also see some rural agricultural just to the north west. Zoning history, some recent rezoning cases date back to 2001 with Michael Poole and the Raw Store Road. Most notably, you have the Edge of Auburn development, and then along Rock Quarry Road to the north, we recently had the Burnett Farms rezoning, which was a townhouse and multifamily development just adjacent to Auburn Station. I'm sorry, Auburn Village. As I said, the existing zoning is Wake County Residential R30, which allows for single-family lots of at least 0.69 acres or a density of 1.45. Under this zoning, the site could approximately accommodate 62 single-family lots, subtracting for infrastructure and open space requirements. There are a number of proposed zoning conditions along with this request. They will be limiting the allowable uses to just residential cluster and townhouse. The maximum density will not exceed 2.8 dwelling units per acre. At a minimum, 45% of the dwelling units will be single-family detached. And there are a number of architectural conditions that are proposed as well. This first condition is different than what was presented at the previous town council meeting. The applicant has decided to prohibit vinyl siding. However, vinyl windows, decorative elements, and trim are permitted. All garage doors will have windows. All townhome buildings will incorporate variations in garage doors so that no two in a row are the same. And all residential building foundations will have an exposed height of at least 12 inches along the front and sides, finished with a masonry product. Foundations less than 12 inches are allowed along the rear. All single-family homes will have an outdoor patio deck or screened-in porch of at least 100 square feet or a sunroom of the equivalent measurements. All townhouse units will have a screened-in porch, patio, or deck of at least 80 square feet. All single-family homes will have at least one variation in the pitch or plane of the front facade, front-facing roofline, and if there are dormers, each dormer will count as one variation. All townhomes will incorporate at least one variation per townhome unit in the pitch or plane of the front-facing roofline, and again, if dormers are utilized, they shall count as a variation. All townhome buildings will incorporate a horizontal offset of at least 2 feet along the front and rear, with the 2-foot offset occurring at least every 2 units. All residential dwelling units will include at least one window along the first floor front facade or have a front door with transom window and side light treatment. The front door of all residential dwelling units shall not be recessed more than 4 feet from the primary facade of the dwelling, not including the garage door. All residential dwelling units shall have a covered front porch or covered stoop of at least 20 square feet. All single-family homes and townhome buildings shall have at least one window on both sides per habitable floor, set and trim of at least 1x4. All townhome buildings shall have a trim board along both side elevations at the attic floor level with different side pattern above, and at least one vent, decorative or functional, along each gable. Any cantilevered projection along the front of all residential units will have cosmetic brackets or shelf supports, and any trash or recycling receptacles stored outside will be screened from view from the public street or alley. There will also be a 6-foot wide paved nature trail that will be provided throughout the community. It'll tie into the amenity areas as well as a 6-foot wide sidewalks, but the actual location will be set at the time of subdivision plan. And they will also be proposing a public greenway easement for the future connection of corridors to the north and south. There was a neighborhood meeting held in April of 2022, and approximately 13 were in attendance. Of the 46 properties that were within the 300-foot notification radius, which was at the time the rule, which was now increased to 800, but at the time it was 300. So as I said, the area of the site is approximately 60.925 acres. And the MF1 generally allows for 6,000 square feet of development for the first unit and an additional 4,500 square feet of development area for each additional unit. And in the single-family detached cluster development, it's limited to 6 dwelling units per acre. This master plan proposes 167 units, 80 single-family and 87 townhouse units, so well below that threshold. For the townhomes, there is a minimum lot width of 18 feet, a front setback of 15 feet, 25 feet if front garage access, and a 15-foot side setback and a 25-foot rear setback. The building separation will be 30 feet or the triangulation method. For the single-family detached, the minimum lot width is 50 feet, a front setback of 20 feet, a side setback of 7.5 feet. However, there is a provision in the UDO that allows the side setback to be reduced to 5 feet if the buildings are shown on the preliminary subdivision plat. And that just allows staff another level of checking to make sure that everything is adequate, as well as any access easements are plotted at that time. The rear setback, there is a 15-foot requirement, and the corner side setback is 15 feet, which again can be reduced to 10 feet if the buildings are shown on preliminary subdivision plat. So here is a copy of the master plan that was provided to you. As you can see, there are 2 products. In the pink here is the townhouse, which is alley loaded. So the rears are facing the street and the front are along either a shared walkway or an open space. The yellow is the single family lots, which are all front loaded on the public street. A little bit different from the master plan that was proposed at public hearing is that they have shifted the alignment of some of their units to allow for this continuous thoroughfare of the trail, the 6-foot trail, all the way over the buffered stream and connecting to the exercise stations and the walking trail to the north. As you can see, it comes around the edge of the stream here into the perimeter buffer as to avoid another stream crossing. So that encroachment is allowable per the UDO and per planning department approval. There is a 75-foot gas easement that runs along the entire northern boundary along Edge of Auburn. And because Edge of Auburn and Gatsby Station have similar lot sizes, there is no requirement for a buffer at the north end. However, they are providing a 20-foot variable width perimeter buffer. As you can see, there are 2 SCMs, which will be screened and vegetated. There are a number of pocket parks throughout the site, including a dog park, and the mail kiosk is located central to the townhouse developments. They are also proposing a trash and recycling container screening adjacent to the driveways, which will include a screen wall. And there is a 30-foot easement that they are providing for future potential connection to the greenway, both to the south here and along Edge of Auburn. This project will have about 860 feet of frontage along Rock Quarry Road, and the daily average traffic count history is recorded here. As you can see, since 2019, it's been pretty consistent at the 6,400 range of trips per day. A TIA was required by the town's UDO and by NCDOT and was completed in July of 2022. Their recommendations that came out of it were a 50-foot southbound left turn lane off of Rock Quarry Road into Site Access 1, 50 feet of southbound left turn lane off of Rock Quarry Road into Site Access 2, and 50 feet of northbound right turn lane off of Rock Quarry Road into Site Access 2. The landscape and buffer requirements, the tree cover is a sliding scale of 18 to 20, which was the rule at the time of submittal. This will be met through 15.9% of tree preservation, with the remaining being replanted to meet the 18.5% that is required. As I said, there is no buffer required along the northern edge. However, they are offering a 20-foot variable width buffer. There is also a buffered stream along the western boundary adjacent to the county subdivisions of single family, and the remaining would be a 30-foot buffer around the residential cluster. There is also a street buffer along Rock Quarry Road, and street trees must be provided approximately every 40 feet along all roadways. Parks and open space, the required is 25%, which is 15.23 acres, and they are proposing an excess of 25%, which will be owned and maintained by an HOA. These will include the riparian buffer, 4 amenity areas and pocket parks, including a dog park, paved nature trail, and passive open space. There are no FEMA designated floodplains. However, as I mentioned, there is a buffered stream that goes throughout the entire site. So there are a couple fingers that come off of this main branch here. And then there is also a buffered stream down in this boundary. Service will be provided for water by Raleigh and sewer infrastructure. Water will connect to the and extended from the lines in Rock Quarry Road, as well as tie into the existing stub in Edge of Auburn. And sewer will also tie into the stub provided by Edge of Auburn and will be extended to adjacent upstream properties per Raleigh water policy. Lighting for streets will meet the UDO. Stormwater management will meet the UDO, and water lines and hydrant spacing are required to meet Garner Fire and Raleigh rules and regulations. All landscaping and parking will be re-verified at site plan or subdivision plan. So your charge here tonight is to determine plan consistency. When considering a rezoning request, the Planning Commission is required by state statute to make a written recommendation regarding the consistency. The plans that you would be considering tonight are the 2018 Garner Forward Comprehensive Plan and the Garner Transportation Plan, as well as the Parks, Recreation, Greenways, and Cultural Resources Master Plan. So for the future land use plan, the staff has determined this request to be consistent. The future land use map designates this area as medium density residential, which includes single family, duplex, triplex, quadplex, and townhouse style residence with no less than 2.5 and no more than 5 units per acre. So Gatsby Station falls right into that range. Medium density residential structures may also include auxiliary units detached from the primary house, and the proposed single-family development at 2.7 units per acre is consistent in both use and density. For the Garner Transportation Plan, staff also deemed this plan to be consistent. The transportation plan calls for sidewalks and road widening along Rock Quarry Road, which this project will install upon construction. And it is also consistent with the Parks, Recreation, Greenways, and Cultural Resources Master Plan, because it is not dedicated as a parkland search area. There is no proposed greenway corridor along this side of Rock Quarry Road. However, in discussions with staff, due to the number of residences proposed in the vicinity, a greenway easement has been recommended and incorporated into the proposal to allow for a future more direct connection to the Neuse River and Garner Road corridors. So this project can be considered consistent. There was a public hearing held on February 21st. Comments from the council included questions about the trail system and the perimeter buffers. There was also a question about what was considered a land disturbing activity because one of the buffers was a undisturbed perimeter buffer. Council asked the applicant to remove vinyl siding as an allowable material, which the applicant has agreed to and has amended their conditions to reflect that. Council also asked about a street connection at the north edge of the property boundary into Edge of Auburn. They determined that in the future cases, we should be more careful about where we propose stub connections into future developments, and there were no comments from the public. So the next step will be a reasonableness determination at the next town council meeting. And the consistency statement is that this request to rezone approximately 60.925 acres from Wake County Residential R30 to multifamily MF1 C264 conditional for the development of a residential community is consistent with the Town of Garner's adopted plans, including the future land use map designation of medium density residential regarding both the proposed density and land use. So staff supports the request but encourages commission to identify specific reasons for whether to agree or disagree with the recommendation. Consensus reasons supporting the commission's approved motion will be documented final staff report for town council and for council's consideration as they approve a statement regarding reasonableness of the action. So the recommended motion should be in the staff report in front of you. But it is also here on the screen for you. And that is it. And I do believe the applicant has prepared a few slides.
Commissioners, do you have any questions for staff?
Not at this time.
Okay, applicant.
Thanks for giving me a break from talking.
Please state your name and address for the record.
Thank you. Excuse me. Good evening. My name is Brad Hart. I'm with Withers Ravenel Incorporated, 115 McKeenan Drive, Cary, North Carolina. I'm a professional engineer and senior project manager with Withers Ravenel, and also here on our project team this evening are Brendy Vega, also with Withers Ravenel, and Todd Alsop and Jennifer Scott with the developer, and Brittany Chase with Exalt Engineering, who's the transportation consultant. So we've just prepared several slides for you. I'll try not to be too repetitive. Really, these slides are for a twofold purpose. The first being to underscore how Gatsby Station is consistent with the Garner Forward land use plan, as well as the draft clue plan for character and land use elements. And if you want, we can jump right in. So Brandy's got the first slide. Again, our project is located in the northeast corner of the town in an area designated for residential neighborhoods. And okay, let's go on to the next one. Okay, so our specific land use is a mixture of single family and townhomes. All the townhomes will be rear loaded. The future land use plan also designates just to the west of our site, directly adjacent to us across Rock Quarry Road, as a future mixed use activity center. And further to the east of us is designated for more residential neighborhoods and open space. So we believe that Gatsby Station is well positioned, in a transition area from more intense uses to the west, gradually to less intense neighborhoods and open space to the east. Regarding transportation, we'll be widening Rock Quarry Road along our frontage to half of its ultimate 4-lane median divided section and aligning that with the proposed or under construction, Edge of Auburn development. So other aspects of the Garner Forward Plan and the CLUE Plan, pedestrian connectivity. Our project has excellent pedestrian connectivity. We've got sidewalks on both sides of all the street. Many of the streets have a side path on one side, which is a wider sidewalk along the primary street pedestrian routes. Also an extensive, network of nature trails connecting the various pocket parks, the dog park, the passive and active open space areas, including the one on the north in between the two stream buffer areas, which is nature trail that loops in between the stream buffers, and we'll have outdoor fitness equipment, and dog park, gazebo near the existing pond, parks, benches, gathering spaces, home and neighborhood choices. So we've got both single family and townhomes with that are organized around the developed open space areas and the pocket parks, connectivity to all of them. Those spaces are distributed throughout the site so that everyone has great access to them. Natural environment is a big thing. As you can see on the plan, there's a lot of natural areas. The project overall has about 54% of the land in total is open space. We've done a great job, I think, of utilizing both the natural open space and some developed open space adjacent to it to bring it all together. Again, as Ms. Harris mentioned, we're also providing 2 public greenway easement stubs, one to the southwest of the project, one to the northeast, so that if there are future public greenways coming through this area, Gatsby Station would be able to connect to them. Okay, let's hit the next one. Okay. Our project is level 2 development intensity, which means we've got at least 2 types of housing product, 1 to 3 stories in height, focused on pedestrian, bicycle, and automobile. So sidewalks on both sides of the road, trails outside of the street, suburban, residential, cross-section character of the roads. We are also located in the draft CLUE document, designates several areas on the plan in their category for priority infrastructure investment areas. Our site is located in a Tier 2R priority investment area, which is for residential and infill development that's focused in areas where there are existing sewer and water infrastructure already in the area, transportation infrastructure, and within range of current, fire and police protection. And also, we're directly adjacent to a Tier 1 in target investment area, which would be the mixed-use activity area directly across the street. So regarding the land use and community character, several of the items in the draft Garner Forward Plan talk about quality development, diversity, sense of community, being local, supporting local business, scale, safety, and natural environment. So we think we do a great job of fitting with all of those. Regarding quality, the architectural commitments, we have architectural commitments including the building materials, lots of open space, lots of trees, trails, great landscaping. Diversity and sense of community. With a mix of housing product, it's a place for everyone of all ages to come together, to live, to enjoy the pocket parks and the natural areas, and be a great part of the community. Supporting local business, we feel that this project meets that goal as well, because we would be looking to establish a residential neighborhood of this character in a specific location that the land use map calls for projects of this nature, and also given its proximity to the mixed-use activity center designation, sets it up to be nearby and to support local business for years to come. Scale and walkability, again, neighborhood streets, lots of sidewalks, lots of trails, very walkable. Safety, visibility, eyes on the streets. Sight lines, the site is open. There's plenty of visibility from the homes to the streets, to the trails. The townhomes are alley loaded, so again, on safety, that's a lot of the traffic that you're keeping off of the main streets and in the alleys. And with all of the trails that we have outside of the street, that's also safe. People that want to take a jog or take a walk don't necessarily have to stay on the street and be in conflict with motorists. They can use the nature trails. Natural environment, we've got lots of natural environment conserved, natural areas developed, amenitized open space, great natural environment. Another term that we've seen in several places throughout the clue document is elevating the public realm, which seems to be focused on public spaces as an element organizing the community and using those to connect people together, and then just open space in general. So really, for all of the bullet points we talked about before, we think our project does a great job of meeting all of that. Now, the next couple slides are really just to try and give you a visual flavor or feel for the proposed housing product that's envisioned for the neighborhood. Now, the final builder for the neighborhood has not yet been finalized. So these are representative examples. The actual house plans or building plans could vary, but these are representative of the size, the width, the character of the homes that are proposed to go into the neighborhood. And these illustrations are also compatible with the architectural commitments and guidelines that are in the zoning conditions. So these are obviously for the townhomes, which look really nice, and again, alley loaded, so none of the appearance where most of the front is a garage door. And then we've got another slide for the single family. Again, these are just illustrations that are consistent with the architectural commitments, represent the general size and width of the product and what we envision this neighborhood looking like. And then to wrap up, the last slide is just circling back to the overall master plan. You can see the trails that are shown in the beige and yellow. There's over 3,000 feet of them, closer to 4,000 feet outside of the streets. The ones shown in red along the street sidewalks, those are the side paths, which would be 6-foot sidewalk instead of the standard 5-foot sidewalk. And you can see with the symbols with the leaves, the pine tree, the guy walking a dog, those are the pocket parks, the dog park, and all of the amenity areas. So with that, I'll just wrap it up and be glad to answer or try to answer any questions you might have.
Questions for the applicant?
I've got a comment and a question. Comment-wise, I appreciate the layout and the green space and utilizing that gas easement to the north along with that variable easement. I think it's a nice green space area. One of the questions I have on the eastern SCM, how do you propose to access that for maintenance in the future? The other ones are all adjacent to roadways except for that particular one.
Yeah, the northeastern one.
Yes.
So that one would be accessed through an access easement that would parallel the sewer and Greenway easement stub.
Another question, and this might go to the traffic person. The TIA that was done was completed in July of 2022. And I was wondering if that incorporated any of the anticipated increased traffic from the adjacent edge of Auburn, which has over 800 lots in there.
Sure. We'll let Brittany take the stand on that one.
Thank you. I'm Brittany Chase with Exalt Engineering, 304 West Millbrook Road in Raleigh. Yes, it did. It took into account what would be on the ground at the time of this build out from Edge of Auburn.
So it took into account that increased traffic.
Yep.
So they have shown here, I guess, 3 turnouts of 50 feet in length. Is that sufficient, given I mean, that's the length of 2 cars, that's half the length of a tractor trailer.
Where are you speaking about?
Well, I'm talking about the TIA, talking about the NCDOT congestion management units recommended improvements, and they're talking about 3 50-foot turn lanes going in, 1 into access 1, 2 into access 2.
Yes.
That 50 feet seems awful short.
Yeah, those are based on the speed limit and also the traffic volumes on Rock Quarry and turning into the site.
Another question, on the north side of the roadway, or north side of the project site, you have 2 cul-de-sacs there. Is there any kind of speed table in the middle of that long stretch of roadway, or is that just going to be a drag strip?
Yep. So at this time, we do not have a proposed speed table in there. It does look awkward, and we had some discussion of that at the public hearing. That's a function of where the stub was provided from edge of Auburn and couldn't logically just be extended straight because of the stream buffer. So it does look like an odd configuration. We did, early on during the review process with staff regarding the master plan, incorporated a slight bit of curvature in it, which you can see we can't do much because we're pinched in between the stream buffer and the gas line. But at this time, we don't have a proposal to do a speed table, but I don't think there would be any objection to it either.
Another question, when you had the February 21st public hearing, you had 155 lots proposed, and here we are 3 weeks later, it's gone up to 167. Why that increase in 12 units in the last few weeks?
And I feel at a loss for words. I don't know if there was a typo somewhere, but I believe that the lot count has not changed. It had been 167, so I'm not sure. Perhaps we had a typo on a document, but I think all of the information that we've had to staff and on the master plan has been at 167 for a number of months. So I'm not exactly sure, to be honest with you, where the 150 something would be coming from.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking on page 10 of 17, but it's under density. Called for 79 single-family homes and 76 townhomes, according to this, on February 21st.
It may have been a typo if you're looking at the staff report.
And I've got another question, but I'm going to hold on that one for now because it may get addressed here later. If not, I'll come back to that one.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a few questions, and with me, it's usually about earth and water. There was a question about blasting at the meeting, which really wasn't answered. It was simply said that there's little or no subsurface rock. You don't anticipate any blasting.
We do not anticipate any. So we did have a geotechnical study done with borings on the site, focused on the areas that were anticipated to be in more excavation, and it did not identify any areas that would have any material that couldn't be excavated by more conventional means. Obviously, that's no guarantee. Right. You can run into a pocket that was missed in that test, so it's always possible, particularly in some of the deeper utility trenches. So we're not anticipating blasting, but I don't think anyone could guarantee for sure that there would be none. But if there were, we would expect it to be little to nothing and extremely isolated and probably only in a deep utility trench.
Like my colleague Ralph, I appreciate the way the development works in the buffered streams in their somewhat natural course. You have 4 proposed stormwater control ponds. Apparently there is a pre-existing pond there.
There is.
Correct. And that is an impoundment. I'm viewing from the northeast side. It's an impound body of water, correct?
You mean the existing pond that's next to our proposed SCM?
Yep.
Yes, it's just like an existing old farm pond that doesn't have a very large drainage area. It's maybe got a natural drainage area of 10 to 15 acres or so. But I'm not sure your question.
Well, it's not a question yet.
Okay.
Does it drain out through that buffered stream that it seems to be
Yes, it
facing?
does drain. So yes, the
So it's-
roadway
it's going
below
under.
it would have to have an appropriately sized culvert to
Okay.
it. Yes, sir.
Okay. So you're managing a stormwater control mechanism pond, but you have a natural or quasi-natural body of water.
Correct.
Do you see any conflict for managing one and not the other in the same way?
No, actually, I don't.
They're very
So-
close.
They are. They are very close. And so the natural pond, even though it's not buffered with a riparian buffer, and that determination's been made, it was deemed to be under jurisdictional regulation by the Corps of Engineers. So by regulation, we can't incorporate it and use it as our stormwater pond, but because of the nature of the topography of the site, we needed a proposed stormwater pond in the general area where everything drains to that existing pond. So the outlet for that pond would have to be designed to be stable with respect to its inflow to the existing pond. And then again, it wouldn't alter the drainage area to the existing pond, because what would drain into that proposed SCM and go into the existing pond is part of the pond's natural drainage area anyway. Okay. So, but all of those are technical things that absolutely have to be taken into account during the permitting designs.
Okay. At least in our notes here, it says there is buffered stream and wetlands located throughout the site. I don't see where the wetlands are indicated on this map.
Yeah, there are some. There's not very many. There are some few narrow wetland pockets that are adjacent to the stream in some areas, but they all fall within the riparian buffers, so they sort of get lost in the shading.
They're very linear?
Very, very. And the only other exception is the eastern finger of the existing pond has a small area of wetland that extends maybe another 50 feet or so upstream of the head of that pond. But other than that, the rest of them are small wetland areas that are directly adjacent to the stream and not very long in length.
Okay. I think that does it for me.
Mr. Carson, just to clarify your question earlier, the density that you were referring to was from the neighborhood meeting, not the public hearing, I believe. So the changes would have been through the design process, through staff review internally, the TRC system, and then until you see the final product in front of you tonight.
Okay, thank you.
That makes sense. That sounds right, because we did redesign the project a fair amount, particularly on the townhome section, and incorporating the rear load product, and that's probably what led to it.
I want to ask another question. I'm not sure if it's directed to you or maybe the town, but it talks about Rock Quarry Road, which is planned to be a 4-lane divided road from Wall Store Road to East Garner Road. That's quite a distance along there. Is that going to be I know it's not associated with this project, but is that going to be a DOT project, or is that a Town of Garner project? Parts of it are in Raleigh
Someday.
someday. So there's no time frame on that.
No, there's not any time frame that I'm currently aware of. I'll check the Campo MTP just to see. I know it's a project that's listed, but I'm sure it hasn't been elevated to a funded TIP yet.
Ms. Phillips, any questions for applicant? Mr. Merrill?
I just have a couple of thoughts here. The mail kiosk, is that also for the single-family lots as well?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And for town staff, how does this density here compare to edge of Auburn? Because looking at this, I'm keep on thinking that in my mind, I would even advocate for a little bit of denser, more toward the 5 acres per unit, knowing that I-540 is coming through there, and all this development is popping up like mushrooms in that area. And so my thinking is we need to get as much housing units as possible into here. But then again, as what you guys noted, could be a transitional area, so we want to keep the density minimal as well. So how does this density compare to Edge of Auburn? Do you guys recall?
I don't have the total density calculation in front of me, but I do know that was a 298.5 acre site, give or take, and their rezoning was for 898 units. So I'll look for the density. 298.5 acres. Jeff's gonna run that calculation quick.
3.0.
Okay. All right, thank you. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And at this time, we allow public comments. And so if there's anyone in attendance who would like to speak in support of this project, now is your time. If you'd like to take the podium, state your name and address for the record. Seeing none, we'll move to those who are in opposition to this project. If there is anyone in attendance tonight who is opposed to this project, you are allowed to speak. Step to the podium, state your name and address for the record. And as you approach, I do just a reminder that we limit comments to 10 minutes, please.
So my name is Tim Holton, 411 Longview Street in Garner, and I just want to say I'm not really opposed necessarily or for necessarily, but I do want to take an opportunity to just sort of maybe have a little bit of a conversation. I've gone to the developer's website, Windjam, correct? You guys make some really nice, you build some really nice homes. Saw you must have dozens of projects going on in the triangle. And they look really nice. Most of what I saw, honestly, was single-family homes, probably, you know, between 50 and 60 homes in a neighborhood, sometimes a little bigger. But almost all single-family homes. When I tried to search townhomes, I couldn't find any until I stuck it into the search area. And then I could finally find some townhomes, but they were in like Pinehurst. So it looks like your specialty is in single-family homes. You've done that throughout the triangle, and they're beautiful. And me personally, and it's just me, but I get a little nervous when people come to Garner and they're doing it differently than they do everywhere else. And I just wonder why is that the case? Why is it that when home builders come to Garner, it's different? And I never get a very good answer. And I'm not probably going to get one tonight. But it's different. And I don't get it. Again, I think you guys do some great things. I would like to read something, and I'm going to put in the name Gatsby Station. I'm borrowing from another development that you all do, a beautiful one. Award-winning Gatsby Station is the quintessential combination of location and style, with impressive amenities such as walk-in junior Olympic-sized pool, cabana with fireplace, open play area, and tot lot. Gatsby Station brings that small town charm together with everyday conveniences, including shopping and a variety of restaurants. The community is ideally situated with quick access to major highways, world-class healthcare, top-rated universities, and a quick ride to downtown Raleigh. You are in excellent hands with a local custom builder team that takes great pride in the quality and craftsmanship of each and every home they deliver. I hope those words can be applied to this. I'm not so sure. The pictures you showed of the homes that you might build, they're decent, but they're definitely not up to the same level of these dozens of other projects that you're doing. So I'm not for or against per se. I am for getting the same quality here that you do everywhere else. That's what I'm for. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, you have any other comments or questions for applicant or staff?
Just one more comment, and I guess I'll direct this at the Withers team, but I certainly appreciate some of the renderings that you provided. A lot of the applicants have a lot of words and they don't have any graphics to go along with it. And I know that's not written in stone as to what you're going to build here, but I certainly appreciate that effort in providing some mock-up diagrams. It certainly helps the commission, I believe.
Anyone else?
Madam Chair, if I could address before you start deliberation, plan.
Thank you. Okay, is someone ready to make a motion?
I will make a motion. I move that the Planning Commission accept the consistency statement detailed in Section 6 of this report as their own written recommendation regarding the consistency of the request with the town's adopted land use plans and recommend approval of CZMP 2208 to the Town Council.
I'll second that.
Thank you. It's been properly moved in second. Is there any discussion? Okay, if not, are we ready for a vote?
Okay, and the motion on the floor is to accept the consistency statement detailed in the staff report as your own written recommendation, and move the project forward to the town council for their approval, for their recommendation for CZMP 2208. Gina Avent.
Aye.
Ralph Carson.
Aye.
Vong Ma.
Aye.
Sherry Phillips.
Aye.
And Michael Boylan.
Aye.
And that's unanimous.
Thank you.
All righty, thank you, Ms. Avent. Job well done. Thank you, commission members. With that, we will move on to the next item of our agenda, rules of procedure discussion. Staff had sent out, prior to our packet, a draft. There were several comments and questions raised. I think staff has done a good job overall of addressing our comments from the previous meeting, and they have done a very fine job of, I'm trying to find it in my packet, I apologize, of responding to the questions that were within our comment document. So if everyone is okay with it, my thought was to go through the comments one by one to make sure that, one, questions are answered fully, and two that we're happy with the response, and then we can make any final recommendations for edits, and then we can move on. And my sense is we may not be able to adopt tonight, but we can definitely adopt next time unless we can adopt with very specific comments. I think that should all work. If you think otherwise, let me know. All right. Rule number 4, I think that's all adjusted for conduct of meeting. I think we're all square there. Rule number 6, the suggestion or the question about should we have an item for recommendations, I think Ms. Jones has made some good points here that it may not be in our best interest to document our recommendations in a very specific way, since they would probably have to be recommendations of all, not just one. So if you're all okay with it, I say we just forego that and just leave it to be the way it is and not worry about recommendations. Hopefully they just get captured in the minutes or summary to town council and not necessarily fall within the minutes.
Now, is that regarding specific recommendations on an application?
So I would say it's oftentimes personally, I'll say I recommend to the developer that you do X, Y, and Z. It's not going to be part of the motion or part of the conditions, but it's just I think you should do this better. That I think would get captured in the summary to council, but it's maybe not a separate section that's just recommendations. You know, anything that gets formally adopted needs to be an amendment or a condition of that vote. So like say, I recommend approval of this with the extra condition that they do X, Y, and Z. Does that make sense?
I understand the part where I'm adding it to the motion, but if it's something that we're just suggesting,
Yeah.
would it be best if we kept that separate? Call it suggestions, call it recommendations. Would it make it easier for town council to look at a bullet point and say, we made these recommendations?
That was my line of thinking when I made that suggestion or that question.
Yeah.
I think maybe Ms. Jones, if you want to elaborate on kind of maybe the pitfalls of that, so to
Yes.
speak.
So technically, it should either be in your motion or it should be voted on so that it is a recommendation of the body, the planning commission. However, there may be some projects where there is a minority view on something and you can always vote to say that the minority position be included in the minutes. If I'm not mistaken, though, now the staff reports that go to council, there is a reference to, you know, anyone can watch the full deliberation of planning commission to see what was discussed during the, particular case review. But the concern is if you just start adding recommendations that haven't been voted on, it's not clear that the entire planning commission has endorsed that or not.
Would we perhaps retitle it recommendations discussed? I mean, I think there's some validity to having it in its own separate block and to be captured as far as, hey, we discussed it, it's not part of the motion, it's some concerns, and maybe town council could say, okay, well, let's make this a condition, or let's discuss it. I just think that whether it's the overhang issue or if it's some other issue, that we do not have to tie it, but we've discussed it, and it should be, I think it should be noted myself. That's my own thought, but
This was my concern in the written remarks that I made in response to your mention of it, John. When it gets to recommendations, then I'm worried about lengthening the deliberation and changing motions to capture these recommendations and so on and so forth. I didn't want to go down that
Yeah,
road.
I agree.
Okay, so my suggestion is, and I use that word, suggestion, is that if a commission member says, as he speaks to the developer or is reacting to the developer, I suggest you look into that more fully, and I suggest you perhaps reference this. It's a suggestion, it might appear in the minutes, but that's all it is. It's not a movement of the body.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I don't know that it needs to be a movement of the body, but sometimes I think tonight might have been an example. You might have recommended a 75-foot turn lane instead of a 50-foot, where it's not a condition, it's not going to change my vote one way or the other, but something that we want council to consider, that a point we brought up that maybe, I don't know. I don't want to, to Mr. Volan's point, I don't want to lengthen out the discussion. I don't want to have to vote on all these different recommendations. So it's a recommendation of the body, because then at that point it's a condition. But if there's a way to somehow make sure that those are documented in our discussion, I don't know if there's a.
So technically, the minutes should be a record of the action taken by the board. My understanding is, to the extent that you do make suggestions and then the applicant, takes those recommendations, they would get presented to town council,
Right.
saying the applicant has modified the plan, and I guess in the staff report, it could be noted that it was at either the entire planning commission or some members of the planning commission suggestion.
So maybe it behooves us to, while I agree with Mr. Carson in that I wish there was a way to document it clearly, maybe we just have to rely on council to take it upon themselves to watch the tape, and we rely on staff to document our conversation however they see best fit. And if, we don't, again, I don't want to make it a vote of the body, and 'cause I think that could get drawn out and complicated. So maybe we just kind of let it lie and let it be more of an informal, see what we can do to help. Oftentimes I think we tend to say, I recommend you do this. And so if you hear that sort of trigger, maybe it's something that we just jot down for the summary.
Yeah, I can do that. Right now, the minutes are just a summary of generally what was spoken about, but if I hear I suggest or I recommend, I can call that out.
It becomes more of a summary, informal, not documented in our rules of procedure, I think. Is that?
Yeah, and I guess if it's something that the commission feels strongly about, or a commissioner, we could attach it to the motion.
Absolutely.
And then vote on it.
Yep, and that way it becomes a recommendation of the body, not just of one individual. Okay. I feel pretty comfortable on that. Everyone else feel good? Okay. Great. Rule number 8, I think it's fine to, for commission members to take an oath at each reappointment cycle. So every 2 years you retake the oath. I think that's fair. That was,
If I can interrupt, the change that was in 7, I just overlooked that, but that can be accepted.
the,
Changing later to less.
yes,
Yeah, so that'll be incorporated when
Okay.
these are adopted.
great. Thank you. Let's see. Rule number 10, item C. Yeah, I think a suggested change of written notice for all special meetings, to me, makes sense. That way it's covered, whether it's called during this meeting or whether it's called during an off time. I think all notices should be written. That just makes it easy, not have to specify if it's this way or that way. And does that work for staff?
So technically, if you were at a meeting where you call another meeting, you have notice, but clearly, if it's the preference,
I think,
Of the body.
yeah, I think it just makes it easier, and it's, that way it's,
Consistent.
we're not having to stipulate if it's in the meeting or not in the meeting.
and the notice can be emailed,
Yeah.
so it's,
Fine. And that way, if someone's not here, that they're still get their notice and, yep, okay. Adoption of agenda, we discussed that tonight. I think we agree that adopting the agenda makes sense, or is fine. I was making a note, Ms. Harris, that, maybe, is that the best place to do that, after the invocation, maybe?
Yeah, I think after the invocation would be
Okay.
better.
Yeah, so if we can update our future agendas to include that item, just for our help. Sorry for the little jumble tonight. Agenda items from the members of the public, number 15. I'm happy to allow agenda items to be suggested and voted upon. I assume those agenda items would come in prior to the meeting. They would go to staff and you'd have to make us aware. Is that how I read that?
Yes. This way, there's a controlled process where it has to go to the planning department first, so that you don't end up with a meeting getting taken over by public comment on something that's not on the current agenda. And it also gives staff the opportunity to somewhat vet the request and be able to respond with information to you, rather than, something coming up at the meeting.
That'd be a classic case of if there was a need to, we would be supplying you some materials at the desk
Right.
to help with that.
Sure. Works for me. Everybody else? Good, all right. Number 16, order of business. Again, I think it's the same situation. Obviously, we want the public to have a chance to comment.
Right. And the idea, and I can clarify this if you want, but that would be public comments that have come in through the department, so not just a general open
Yes.
public comment period.
Yeah, that would be great. I think that was the concern. Rule number 32, the open meeting laws. I think we have enough clarification. Are there any other comments on on how that works with the open meeting versus gathering versus email versus whatnot?
There's not a bright line on this, but if you were all emailing all at the same time so that it becomes like a conversation as opposed to, disjointed in time, they consider that to be a meeting. The same as if you were doing text chats or using some kind of platform like that.
Sure.
All in rapid succession. But like I said, doesn't say it has to be like a minute apart, 5 minutes apart, 10, so. But the idea is that, you can't evade the open meeting or have a side conversation that's, not on the agenda.
Right, exactly. Okay. I think those were the only notes that were in the columns. Any other further follow-up? All right, seeing none, are we better off to hold our vote until we get the revisions, or should we try to adopt it based on the comments made tonight? I don't know I mean, I'm happy to get this off the table and be done with it, but I also
I
don't
think
want
you
to.
can adopt with the instructions given. We can certainly circulate it to make sure everything was captured. And if there needs to be a change, then we can make that adjustment at a future meeting.
That works for me rather than trying to drag it out. All right. Do we have a motion?
I'll make that motion that we vote on the rules with the added comments that were added this evening.
I would suggest we probably change that motion to we adopt or do not adopt, not vote.
We adopt the rules of procedure with the comments made and incorporated from this evening's discussion.
All right, we have a motion and a second.
Okay, the motion on the floor is to adopt the minutes of, to adopt the rules of procedure with the comments made tonight, to be recorded. And I will call the vote. Gina Avent.
Aye.
John Blasko.
Aye.
Ralph Carson. Vong Moi.
Aye.
Sherry Phillips.
Aye.
Michael Boylan.
Yep.
And that's unanimous.
All right, thank you. I'm glad to have that one out of our hands. Thanks for all your work, Ms. Jones, on that. Moving on to our last case of the night, zoning text amendment ZTA 2301, the stormwater requirements.
Good evening, Commissioners. I am Jacqueline Stanner, the Stormwater Program Administrator for the Town of Garner. Here to present ZTA 2301, text amendment change to the Stormwater Program for nitrogen control. So this went to Town Council public hearing on February 21st, and it is here tonight for your review for consistency, and then if it is voted on, it will go back to Town Council for approval with an adoption date of May 1st. So the area for the stormwater nitrogen requirements is all of Garner, the ETJ plus the city limits, since everything drains to the Neuse River. So just a background, the Neuse rules, the Neuse River nutrient sensitive water management strategy was adopted in 1997 by the North Carolina Environmental Management Commission with the goal to achieve 30% nitrogen reduction from controllable and quantifiable sources, which included non-point sources and point sources. Those included wastewater treatment plants, urban stormwater runoff, and also agricultural. As part of the rules, 15 local governments in 1997 were subject to the Neuse rules in the basin, and this included the town of Garner. So they and us were required to implement a local stormwater management plan aimed at achieving that 30% nitrogen reduction goal as it relates to non-point urban stormwater runoff. The original rules included 4 general components: new development review and approval, illegal discharges, retrofit locations, and public education. So in 2020, the Neuse and Tar-Pamlico nutrient management strategies were updated and revised pursuant to the legislative mandated periodic rules review process, which is why we're here tonight. Essentially, DEQ updated their rules for the Neuse rules, so we've had to update our program rules. Post-construction stormwater control on new development is included now in the revised rules. I just want to point out that Town of Garner was already doing this. We had implemented it as part of the old rules. It was just sort of wrapped into the new development review process. But now it has its own dedicated section within the big book. Also included in the rules readoption are newly named communities within the Neuse Basin that were not previously named. I'm not sure why some communities were left out at the time, but now they've all been included. So the major changes between the old and the new rules, I'll just go through these. This is going to summarize a lot of the text change, and then as we go through the text change, I'll just kind of briefly describe what each one means. Again, the post-construction requirements are now clearly defined. New rules explicitly define disturbance thresholds, which we also were doing in the old rules, or our old book as well. One of the biggest changes is the calculation method for nitrogen export is changing. Currently, we use a method 1 and method 2 calculation form for known and unknown impervious surface areas, such as commercial developments or single-family residential with unknown. We'll now be moving to a DEQ-approved tool called the SNAP tool. They've removed the retrofit requirements as part of the old rules. The other major change is the built-upon area threshold that will, so essentially when using the method 1 and method 2, it was the loading rate that determined whether or not you needed a stormwater device, but now there's going to be a general 24% BUA or greater will require a stormwater management control device. And I just want to point out that although this is all of Garner, anything that drains to Lake Benson does apply to the Swift Creek Land Management Plan, and those have more stringent rules. So those are going to supersede these new rules. So anytime a development comes in that's within the Lake Benson watershed, it is not going to be subject to that 24%. It will be the 12%. But for the sake that we're talking about nitrogen, we're going to focus on that 24%. The 1-year peak flow match requirement from the old rules has been removed as well. But also want to note we require the 1 and 10 and 25-year storm events, so that will not be changing for us. They've also required a program to ensure maintenance of permitted SCMs and compliance with the rule for life of the development. And then I've worked with Terry, and we've included a section in the enforcement ordinance to ensure the compliance of these SCMs. So we'll go through that at the end. So again, I'll just kind of go through these, and we can talk if you guys have any questions. A is not changing. It's essentially that we will protect and maintain riparian buffers. B, we're removing that, those are the nitrogen loading rates from the method 1 and method 2 calculation. And this is just a general, the project area is defined in this one. C, developers shall provide on-site stormwater treatment for any cumulative built-upon area greater than 24%, and must meet all the other DEQ requirements as well. D is basically just saying any expansion of a project is also going to be subject to that built-upon area threshold. So for example, if everybody approves a development, and it's over the 24% threshold, and then 5 years later it comes in for a modification to add another component and more impervious surface, that additional impervious surface will also be incorporated into the cumulative BUA. So essentially nobody can just kind of do little projects here and there to skirt stormwater rules. E is basically just summarizing our impervious surface table. So with our method 1, we were using a 20% estimate on single-family lots. That may have been a good estimate 20 years ago, but we've realized that now how lots are shrinking and houses are getting bigger, that we really needed a more conservative estimate for future build-out or final build-out of a single-family subdivision, so that we don't have to track it every time somebody wants to come in for a patio or driveway pad or anything like that. So we've come up with these thresholds that can be changed if we see that they're not working. DEQ will work with us. It doesn't have to go through the EMC again. But for anything less than or equal to R4 single family, we're going to estimate 35% on the single family lots. And again, that does not mean that exceeds, there's still going to be that threshold of 24% overall impervious surface for the subdivision that will kick it into having a SCM. It's just, that's what we're going to estimate on each lot when the engineer comes in for final build out. For anything that's R8, it will be 45%, and multifamily and commercial will be calculated with the known impervious surface area that's reported. So F is really not changing much. So projects shall either meet a stormwater nitrogen loading rate target of 3.6 pounds, which is the current target as well, or meet volume runoff match. So volume runoff match is basically detention of the sites, that they're not allowed to release more than 10% of the post-development runoff compared to the pre-development runoff, which is also in our rules as well, so they're not allowed to do that. G, the developer shall determine the nitrogen loading rate generated for a development before stormwater control, so that they can determine what type of stormwater control that they need to meet the nutrient target. Developers are already doing this. DEQ just wanted us to put this all in our ordinance so that it was kind of set in stone rather than all in this book. They actually wanted us to put this entire thing in our UDO, and we told them we felt more comfortable as an attachment, and we would just highlight these options as part of the actual UDO. H is essentially saying that the nitrogen loading standards are supplemental to, but not replacements for other stormwater standards required by federal, state, or local law, including riparian buffer rules or the water supply watershed rules, which I mentioned earlier. Some of those will supersede these nitrogen rules. All projects shall meet stormwater design requirements set forth by the NC DEQ Stormwater Design Manual and minimum design criteria, which is something we were already requiring them to do. J is basically just saying when high-density stormwater design is required, the stormwater system shall basically meet those state standards and should also be designed to treat the volume of runoff generated from all built-upon area with a primary SCM. They're also allowing people to use off-site SCMs to treat developments, which is something that they didn't do before. I don't know that we're going to see that a lot because with the watershed water supply rules, people are required to do that on their particular site. So we may see this maybe in the White Oak corridor sometimes, but again, we also require detention as well. So I don't know how they would be able to meet all of the town's stormwater requirements while having an off-site stormwater device. So that will be something we probably don't see much. K is when there isn't a high-density stormwater design. They'll still be subject to meet the low-density requirements, which is just having downspouts pointed towards grassy areas, utilizing best practices possible. L, projects may reduce the export through a combination of either SCMs or an approved regional offsite SCM or through permanent nutrient offset credits or a collection of any of those options. M is something that was already happening as well. It just states that when a development is approved, I will write the letter that issues the amount of credits that they owe for nitrogen offset, and the developer shall pay that and provide me the receipt prior to us issuing a building permit. N was in our UDO, that's just our detention of the 1, 10, 25, and sometimes 100-year storm events. So I'll go through, this is the proposed text change to the enforcement. We just, Terry and I had talked about how we didn't really have a good mechanism of enforcement of these. Currently, right now, it's just housed in either complying with the actual site plan or within the nuisance ordinance, which it doesn't really have a lot of teeth. So we went ahead and added these in here. So the engineering department may investigate violations on its own initiative or upon receipt of any type of complaint. And then the procedures will be a written notice of violation shall be issued indicating a nature of the violation, ordering the action necessary to correct it, associated deadlines and penalties, and advising that the order may be appealed to the Board of Adjustment. If the property owner or responsible entity does not appeal and fails to correct the violation, or if the property owner or responsible entity fails to correct the violation after final Board of Adjustment decision upholding the notice of violation, the property owner or responsible entity shall be subject to remedies stated in the next slide. So the person's liable is just whoever is going to be the owner or the tenant of the property. The violation or failure to comply shall subject the offender to a civil penalty of $100 per violation. If the offender fails to pay the civil penalty within 10 days after being issued the civil penalty, the penalty may be recovered by the town in a civil action. Each day a violation continues shall be considered a separate offense. And then D basically just says we can use any of the tools in our toolbox as well as this enforcement mechanism. We can use a stop work order or section 7.3.4 of the UDO, or a nuisance, which is currently listed as chapter 6, can be used to enforce. So staff recommends that you find that this is consistent with the Garner Forward Plan, and that you send it back to town council for approval, and it will be adopted on May 1st. And happy to answer any questions. You know, this is sort of a text-heavy document.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
I've got a basic question, but what is the source of nitrogen loading on these projects?
So,
What,
like urban stormwater runoff, so I guess it's just rooftops, driveways, you know, cars park in driveways, so the oils and the stuff that's captured from the cars, or if you're washing your car in your driveway. From a commercial site, I would say most of it's probably vehicles, but there is nitrogen in rain as well, so that's going to be running off the pavement. But I think the pavement is probably the biggest source of the urban stormwater runoff.
So DEQ has fairly limited backup to issue NOVs, but this seems to almost give the town of Garner more leeway in penalties than what DEQ does.
So the enforcement portion will actually give us more power when somebody's not maintaining their stormwater device. Right now, we don't have a lot of power we've set up a program where when these are implemented, the property owner has to submit a inspection and certification every year. Previously, I was doing those annual inspections and then sending maintenance letters out. And then sometimes we would have trouble getting people to comply with maintenance, and sometimes not. But that enforcement section will help us essentially make sure that these SCMs are maintained.
This only relates to SCMs?
Not always, because we can also use it to enforce really any part of the stormwater program. Like, for example, we've had an issue where a property owner or a commercial builder built a stormwater wetland that wasn't functioning properly, and we were able to use a piece of the UDO to keep them in violation until they were able to fix it to where it was working properly. So there could be several different aspects that it could come into play.
So just a question on item D about additional built-upon areas and expansion. So if you have a commercial development, and I'm just throwing out a hypothetical here, if they utilized half of their property for this development and then 10 years down the road they want to add on to it, would this require them, you said it was cumulative before, but if they design something, they wouldn't necessarily have to upgrade the existing SCM? They could add one into the new area?
They could
or
add a new one if they wanted, or they could basically retrofit the old one to include it. So they could do it, I guess, however they would want to.
Okay. And going to the penalties for violation, you note on here that it's 10 days after being issued. Took 2 months for me to get a letter from Charlotte. I think 10 days is very short turnaround. With the mail system the way it is right now, and has been for the last couple of years, I would suggest that be changed to something more realistic, given the issues that we have right now.
Gary's just checking to make sure it's the same as the UDO.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just like 10 days for them to mail a letter. I mean, like I said, it took 2 months almost to the day to get a letter from Charlotte by US Post. So if you follow this and you don't react, or a property owner doesn't react within 10 days, all of these other issues kick in.
And that's to, like, just to clarify, but right now, the procedure is, like, let's say there is a notice of a problem or somebody has a maintenance issue. Currently, they have 90 days to correct that maintenance item. And then after 90 days, if it has not been corrected, they get a second letter where they get another 2 weeks. So after that 2 weeks is when that violation would be sent out. So I guess it seems like maybe the 10 days is short, but really in theory, it's probably about 4 months of time that they have.
Well, I think that time frame of 10 days is too short, and C in the next section, I don't see how every day that continues shall be considered a separate offense. It's still the initial offense. That's almost like saying if you get caught speeding, and you don't pay the speeding ticket each day, you're tagged with another speeding offense. I'm gonna make the following suggestion, is that 10 days perhaps be extended to 30, and item C be struck. And I don't know what legal has to say about that, but I don't know how you can call one offense a separate offense for every day of violation.
So the continuing nature of offenses, that's in the town's code of ordinances. That's fairly typical, because otherwise you would fine someone $100 and they do nothing for 6 months. That's not much of a penalty. Having it each day be a separate offense makes it, gives an incentive for them to take action. So the 10 days collecting, that is in the nuisance ordinance. For nuisances, I believe. I don't see that in the current UDO. But that is, again, like Jacqueline said, that's basically, it's like you get the ticket after you've had a notice of violation, you've had an opportunity to appeal, you've had an opportunity to remedy the situation, and now you're getting a fine. You know, we could stretch that out, but the problem is if every day is a separate offense, they've gotten $3,000 worth of fines before we're starting to collect them. And so this can rack up very quickly.
Ralph, it's not like they don't know they have a problem and it's being sprung on them and they have 10 days to fix it. They've known about this issue for quite some time.
No, and I understand that. I guess I'm just hung up on the notification of 10 days and it being considered a separate offense. If you want to have cumulative fines, but if you're creating a separate offense, does that mean every day the town is going to send out a new letter because this is now a new offense? I mean, if something is creating an offense, the town has to notify the owner, tenant, occupant, whatever.
Is it just a matter of saying $100 per day? Is that kind of address what you're getting at instead of?
Yeah, I think that's probably more.
So it's not the cumulative that bothers you. It's the wording that it's a new offense. So if it was
It's a new offense,
$100 per day until it's corrected,
or whatever that
or
is, yes.
yeah, which I think is the same intent.
It has the same effect. It's just basically you're creating a separate offense, which means the town would then have to notify every day that you now have a new offense. And I think that's just a paperwork burden for the town, first of all.
I mean, in reality, you say it's due within 10 days. If we were to collect it as a debt, we'd be filing a court case. You know, they'd have to get summons to court. You know, it's going to take a long time to get to that collection time, but it's certain. The idea is to create an incentive that they need to act, or there's a penalty associated with it. I don't know that we have very many that get to the penalty phase. Most of them, I think, other than a lawsuit that the town was involved with, actually comply.
Yeah, I mean, there's been maybe a handful that I've had trouble, and the only reason there was trouble was because I couldn't locate the property owner. But I have not had, other than the one commercial developer who did not want to comply and fix his wetland. That went on for about a year. That's really been the only time that it's sort of gotten to this point where we reached out to Terry and did a violation. But I don't send or issue very many violations for these stormwater control measures.
And we're obligated to serve the property owner with the notice of violation before the clock for their appeal period can start. So we can't issue civil penalties until they've had an opportunity to appeal and that time has elapsed.
But there's other things that happen ahead of the notice of violation, notice of,
Yeah, so, and it's changed a little bit now, so they'll get their inspection from their third party, but they'll get 90 days if they have corrective measures that they have to take, or sometimes longer, depending on what season it is or what kind of plan they make. And if it goes out of that realm and there's no effort or no plan that they've shown, that's when a second letter will be issued, or, and then only until there's still no plan or anything issued after 2 weeks of that will the violation be sent.
thanks for the clarification. Yeah, I think for me, since they get that, notice of out of compliance, 90 days to correct it or come up with a plan, then a secondary notice of out of compliance, then the notice of violation. The 10 days doesn't bother me as much, but I understand if that was the first notice, that 10 days would definitely be way too short. But
Well, again, I'm just kind of following up that last part of section B, is if you don't pay it within 10 days, the town may recover in a civil action. So you get the mail delayed, and all of a sudden you can't pay it in time, and the town has already gone through the extra expense of starting a civil action.
But I think she said that it wouldn't necessarily start on day 11. They wouldn't rush down to the courthouse and start it. They would give you ample time. And like she said, you've already had 4 months, to kind of correct your issue. And you're obviously not concerned about it if 4 months have lapsed and you haven't done anything. So, they have to have some way of, encouraging you to fix this issue. So.
Here's where I'm kind of going with this. We see it in HOAs quite often, where if they don't pay a fine within that 30 days is typical, and they'll get notices and stuff, and all of a sudden it's turned over to legal, who puts a lien on the property that costs them another $1,000. And I kind of see the same thing happening here, given that time frame.
And
That's just where I stand, so.
and we have not issued any violation penalties for my time here. I will say usually when they get that violation letter, they will work to basically get a plan in place and fix what they need to fix. So it has never escalated to that point. But I will say, having to send out like the illicit discharge one that has the fines listed in it, those are helpful because I don't want to say they scare property owners, but they are an incentive to get them to do what they are required to do.
I think I would be willing to go 15 days if that made people happier. Again, given that this is sort of the last ditch effort to get someone to comply. They haven't, because of the mail can be really slow and have issues, but I don't know if that makes, if that is helpful or not, but, I don't know if we're just picking out
My only
numbers.
concern is that currently the enforcement of this has been in the nuisance ordinance. We're not taking that out of the nuisance ordinance. That has the 10 days, so if we were using all of our tools in the toolbox with a very recalcitrant property owner, we wouldn't want to be running nuisance penalties on one schedule and UDO penalties through stormwater on another schedule, because it just becomes difficult. Again, we're not trying to pile on, but there's sometimes we want to tell people what are all the possible ramifications. And I'm sorry, Mr. Carson, earlier you asked about the continuing violations. So typically we would have an inspector verify violations, but say they haven't, they need to take out a tree and they haven't done that. If the tree is there on day 1 and the tree is there on day 30, we would count all 30 days. If it's something that can be corrected, for instance, clearing the drain, or I'm thinking the wrong word, but that,
Like a clogged orifice or something.
right, a clogged orifice that could be corrected one day, but then could recur another day. We wouldn't necessarily if an inspector verifies that that condition was corrected, they wouldn't count the violation days up until the next time, but when they might start the clock again when they see it's been clogged again. So it somewhat depends on the nature of the violation. But yes, before we would ever go to court to try to collect these, we'd have to show that an inspector's been out there and verified that the violation was in fact continuing.
I did have a question on the BUA estimating in the chart. I feel like 35% for R4 and 45% for R8 are fairly low, given especially how we're seeing houses build closer and closer together with driveways and porches and patios. I feel like those numbers are probably not very, my gut tells me they're not accurate. Have we done any sort of evaluation of built areas to see how it looks?
Yeah, so these numbers are pulled from a couple different developments, an average, and then also compared with the current zoning of the R4 through R8 as well. I think the R8, we actually came up with 50%, but it wasn't consistent with the R8 zoning overall, so that's why it was lowered a little bit to 45. Like I said, if these numbers aren't working out for us, we can always change them too. We're not bound to these numbers forever and ever. So if we kind of try them out for the next couple months, 6 months or a year, and see how they're doing as compared with the plans that are coming in, I guess we would have to have a discussion with planning as far as the zoning as well, and then maybe adjust them that way.
Yeah, I think that would be good, just as the plats come in to verify all of them, because to me, my gut feeling says it's low.
Yeah, this is such a tricky, because we've never really had to do this before. The state has helped us make that estimate, and they weren't going to do that this time, so it's going to be kind of like a trial and error for us to figure out what's the best numbers for us to use there. And with all of the municipalities in the same boat, the state may end up doing it because they are forced to. So that's another possibility that may end up happening as well.
Any other questions or discussion? We have a motion? Whether to adopt or reject or adopt with conditions or?
I will move that the Planning Commission accept the consistency statement detailed in Section 4 of this report as their own recommendation regarding the consistency of the request with the town's adopted land use plans, and recommend approval of ZTA 2301 to the Town Council.
You have a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second.
Okay, I will call the vote, and the motion is to accept the consistency statement and move forward to Town Council for recommendation. Gina Avent?
Aye.
John Blaska?
Aye.
Ralph Carson?
Nay.
Vang Moi?
Aye.
Sherry Phillips. Michael Voiland.
Aye.
And that's 5 ayes and 1 no.
Thank you, and I would, if we can, try to document Mr. Carson's objections in the summary. Thank you much. With that, moving on to reports from staff.
Let's see. I don't have a lot for you tonight. The only, I think, council action since your last meeting was to approve the zoning text amendment for the public notice revisions. So that now stands at 800 feet, but includes both property owners and occupants, including occupants of apartment complexes. And also to start having the applicant supply staff with the mailed and postage stamped envelopes. Other than that, we are looking to wrap up review of the clue document by March 23rd, so that gives you 10 more days. Again, please send any comments to both Matt and myself, and hopefully we'll be able to move that on to the public, the official public review portion, with potentially having that on the books by the beginning of, I think, or mid-July. That's currently the target date. I did look up Rock Quarry Road. The portion of Rock Quarry from New Hope to Battle Bridge is actually in the current TIP. So that is slated to be done sometime before 2030. The rest of Rock Quarry is in the 2050 horizon. So not even the 2040.
As long as they don't rush it.
Yeah. Subject to change, though. When it's that far out, it's always subject to change. Other than that, that's all I have, except I'll be glad to help with any questions you all may have.
With the clue document, I'll admit I haven't gone through it very closely yet, but I did go through some of the comments that Matt sent out from the public. Have those influenced the draft that we have now, or are those sort of just kind of hanging out there as something to consider?
No, those are still hanging out as something to consider. So this, what you have is his consultant's draft, which was what was presented at the public meeting.
Okay. Mr. Carson, I think you had a question that you had mentioned to me earlier.
Oh, yeah, that, okay, but I got
Yeah,
one other
yeah,
question for
please.
Jeff. You mentioned about the tip agenda. Where is the widening of Jones Sausage Road going from Amazon over either to East Garner Road or on through to 70? Where's that stand? Because a couple of years ago, when they put out for the bond in the election referendum, one of the things was we were going to do Jones Sausage Road widening, and I think they had a start date of this spring. And I know it got delayed a little bit, but where is that in the whole design tip?
I'll ask Leah to come up and give, because it's assigned an MTP number, so it has a number, but it's not actually in the funded state transportation improvement program. We're actually trying to elevate it through contributing to the design and hopefully getting LAP funding to speed it up.
Help me out and answered my question.
Well,
No, but
you had more
that's okay.
specifics.
To elaborate a little bit, so yeah, the section we're working on now as a town project is from where the improvements at Amazon stopped down to East Garner Road, including some improvements to East Garner Road as well. So it's kind of a roadway / intersection improvement project. That is between 35 and 60% design right now. Like Jeff said, we were hoping to get some LAP funding this year for it, and we did not. So we are going to reapply again next year. There was one project that Raleigh ate up most of the funding this year with, which,
Six Forks Road, imagine
yeah.
that.
We are hopeful that without that in consideration next year, we'll have a better chance. But since the scope of that project had increased along with costs just increasing, it would be helpful to the rest of the projects we need to do to get some additional funding for that. So that's still in the works. I would say we have speculating construction probably next year, hopefully, for that first portion. The second portion down to 70, which would be realigning Jones Sausage over the railroad down to 70, doesn't have a time frame on it yet. That's still kind of, it's on our plans. We know it needs to be done, but we know that one will require partner funding. That's kind of too big for the town's budget at this point.
So the section going to East Garner Road, I guess the way I read the whole bond narrative was you vote for the bond, it's going to move this forward, but it sounds like, no, that's not the case. You were counting on other financing and maybe a little bit of that bond is going to
Right.
go towards.
Not necessarily. It is planned for with the bond funding. The thought is because it has become a lot more expensive than what we originally thought it was going to be, we would prefer not to use all of the bond funding on that one project because there are other projects that were planned to come from that funding as well. So it is, in our budget for the bond funding now. The town is prepared to, take that on if necessary. But it would be helpful if we could get some partner funding to help with some of the cost.
The other question that I had that Mr. Blasco is referring to, I know Jeff, but I'm not that familiar with the other two ladies down there. And I know you had appeared before, and I think you had kind of introduced yourself, but would you mind doing it again, just so we can kind of
Oh, absolutely.
get familiar, because we don't have any nameplates in front of you.
Well, I'm Ashley Harris, and I present to you every month. I'm a planner one. I started with the department back in October. Previously, I had done graduate school at NC State for landscape architecture, so I'm kind of switching gears from design to planning. But I think I'm getting my feet wet here pretty quick and hopefully improving, although today I had a frog in my throat for the whole presentation. But
And I am Burnett Brown. I am the new planning technician with the planning department. I have just surpassed my 30-day mark here, and I have not run out the door yet, so I think I am going to stay. I am assisting Ashley and shadowing her in hopes to give her some relief coming here soon with some of the duties and serving you all.
Would it be possible just to get the nameplates, just, because sometimes during the conversation, I can't remember the name, and at least if it was in front, it might help.
Sure. Yep. We can do that.
sounds good to me.
Alrighty, speaking of traffic funding, 50 is always a hot topic, and maybe misremembering a conversation I had, whether it was here or with other people outside of this duty, but was there some agreement from a developer to help with widening of 50 between New Bethel Church and Timber?
So there has been a collection of 2 financial contributions towards that effort. So whenever the right time and complete funding and design, those monies can be contributed towards that. But yeah, there's 2 projects that have done that. The Oak Park West, which is now Magnolia Park, and the Bethel project, which is now Oak Manor.
Those will help the town fund the project, or those will help DOT fund the project?
Could go whichever way.
They're just in a pot,
Yeah.
waiting.
Yeah.
It's one of the things we hear from everyone we talk to is traffic, 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 and I know.
So it will be interesting to see what impact when 40 starts to open, whether it does or doesn't. That is on track. Last report I had from DOT was that they are expecting to open the section from the bypass, 70 bypass, Clayton bypass, up to the Beltline by May. So within the next month and a half, and every time I travel on it right now, there's a different piece of it that has new asphalt. So I know they're getting close. But it will be interesting to see just how much, because that will be 5 lanes in both directions. Granted, it's going to bog down again until they finish all the way
Sure.
to 42 and what have you. But
Right.
so we'll see. And then, we got kind of hit by the contraction of the available funds at DOT. They got real aggressive there for a couple of years. And then the last time they did the prioritization process, there were no additional funds to put towards the reprioritized projects. The next time that will come up, I think, well, no, that just happened. So I'm not even sure. It might be in 2024 sometime. And 50's always scored well, just not well enough. Kind of somewhat similar to our project being beat out by Six Forks for LAP funding. Our section of 50 has always been behind the other side of 50 on the north end.
Right.
So we'll see.
All right. Thank you.
Quick question, Jeff. When I first came on the Planning Commission, I think the first project I voted on was for a Montessori school just north of the Masonic Lodge on Benson Road.
Yes.
And obviously they've started to build that. Did we know at the time it was going to be called Oak City Academy?
Yes. It has always had that name.
we-
It has that name currently.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't recall knowing that at the time. I'm just,
Okay.
I just pass that sign every day now, and I'm going, really?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Speaking of Benson Road, any word on our Bojangles?
That's what I was getting ready to ask.
I know Mr. Voiland's looking forward to that.
I'm trying to remember what the last update was on that. I know they had gone through their traffic study with DOT, and they reached an agreement on what had to happen. I want to say, though, that at that time it was like a year away before they were going to start construction. So my guess is maybe we're still 5-6 months from that. But we'll check around. Maybe at next month I can have something for you.
Sounds good. All right. Any other questions, comments? Hearing none, we will